Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Arc of Ohio podcast. I'm Jen Powers-Algie, and I have a great guest, a returning guest with me today. I have Dr. Pepper Stetler. Pepper is a writer, an art historian, a professor, and a disability rights advocate. She has written extensively on the issues facing people with intellectual disabilities and their caregivers. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, The Atlantic, Slate, The Progressive, and we had her on the podcast when she wrote her book, A Measure of Intelligence, One Mom's Reckoning with the IQ Test. And we talked a lot about that book and education at that point. And I was like, when I started doing this little education series, special education, I thought I should have her back on to talk some more. And then, like right at the same time, she wrote an article, and her latest article is called "The Slow Death of Special Education," and it came out in The Atlantic last month. I highly recommend it. Check it out. Honestly, The Atlantic is such a good piece of work. I started subscribing to it.
Oh, good.
It's worth the money. Like it's like the articles in there are just really well done, and I always learn something. So I highly recommend getting it.
Yeah.
It's a Christmas present, guys.
Oh, that's great.
So thank you, Dr. Stetler, for joining me again.
Yeah, Jen, thanks. And you got to call me Pepper.
I know,
And
sorry.
I
We're friends, so it's hard for me to call you doctor, but you
do
earned it,
not.
girl. You earned
Um,
it.
yes, I should call you then Jen Powers Esquire, right? Um, anyway, I am thrilled to be here, and thanks, Jen, for having me. It's really good to be back.
Yes. Yeah, so Pepper works up at Miami University. She's a professor, an art history professor, and has a daughter with Down syndrome. So
Yep.
our kids are like the same age.
Yeah,
And so
very
that's how
close.
we met. But then
Yeah.
she's been doing such great work in this area, and I've just been thrilled to see all like the research that you do is just phenomenal. I always get something new, even though I'm always researching and reading this stuff. When I read that article, I was like, wow, I had no idea. And it made me do some extra research and
Thanks,
it made
Jen.
me start thinking about like just as a mom, I hate saying this because I hate when people say this, but I almost can't imagine being a mom before the IDEA, like before 1975-ish.
Hmm.
Um, can you tell us like what that period of time was like before then, before we had the Park case in 71 and then which led to
Yeah.
all of the statutes that we just take so for granted but are so meaningful for us today. Tell us what it was like if you were a child, like if you were Evie and Louisa, what would it have been like before like the 70s in our country?
Yeah. I mean,
Hmm.
I don't like thinking about it either, because it would have been pretty pretty awful. And I try to think about this question like also in relation to like who Jen is and who Pepper is and who Evie is and who Louisa are and how other things besides their disability would have also affected what kind of opportunities they would have gotten as well. But like I guess the most introductory way to say it is that their access to a public education would not have been guaranteed. Like I one way of thinking about this is how humiliating it would be to go to schools and ask if your kid can go to school there. Like pretty please, will you educate my child? And I imagine I would have been faced with an onslaught of preconceived assumptions about what my child could do. Um, but also, so there were, I might have had the option of going to a private school for kids who are have intellectual disabilities, although that's not the term they used at the time before 1975. So I could have paid for private education. There were places in the country who that did have schools that were publicly funded for kids that needed special education, but they were separate schools. And certainly, if there was anything in a public school, it was entirely a separate, segregated classroom. But I also think, okay, so I would have had the opportunity to even think about private education, probably because I'm a upper middle class white person. Um, and Jen, you might have been even a little better off than me because you live in a city, like places that had a higher population and had more requests for special education. We're usually giving them a little bit more often. So I live in Oxford, and I do not know anything about the local history actually of special education in Oxford, but I do assume that since Oxford is a rural area, I don't know. I don't know where people would have gone if that would have. There's nothing around, so I don't know if that would have been really possible at all. So, for people that like probably don't know the history of education in this country, that like compulsory education wasn't a thing until the early 20th century. But that, of course, at that time meant like white people, right?
Yeah.
Or
And
so
boys,
and
and
boys,
not girls.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, it would have been pretty grim. But I also think about, the laws that were passed in 1975, the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, which eventually becomes what we refer to as IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. It changed its name like in the 90s. Um, there was like there were other things that that law did besides just make public education mandated for students with disabilities. It before that we lacked a kind of diagnostic system, right? Like there was no obligation to identify a need. So that was sort of left up to very kind of casual conversations of parents. But also something else that's really amazing, and I think that's overlooked by the passage of IDEA, was the kind of systemization of research of special
Yep.
education, right? So the Education for All Handicapped Children Act just creates this pipeline of research and funding of research and teacher training of how to educate students with disabilities. So even if I found a very magnanimous school who would have allowed my kid with Down syndrome in 1955 to be part of a school, it would have probably been like just sit here
Yes.
and like just sit there, and that no kind of needs would have been met. And there's a way in which the law really brilliantly recognizes that it's not just about access
Yes.
to the physical space. It's about how do we educate students with different learning disabilities and cognitive disabilities the best. We need to like federally support our
Yeah.
ability to do this well.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important part of the law.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I was reading about when I was doing some research for this podcast was I read that schools were like closing their ears and shutting their eyes and like pretending like these children weren't out there. And if someone came to their door, hey, I think there's a kid down the street who might need to be educated and they're not getting this, they would just be like, la 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 la, I'm not hearing you. And this
Yeah,
is where we get child find, which
yeah,
I've always kind of also taken for granted as a mom. I'm like, I mean, what do we need child find for? Most of my kids were, you know, given their
right.
rights pretty quickly just because I did the did the work like we talked about. I'm a highly educated
Yeah,
person who was already putting my kids in all kinds of interventions before we even got into public school, but schools didn't want children with DD in their buildings.
no,
They didn't seek them out. They didn't think it was important. They didn't want them like messing up their programs, basically, is how they thought about it.
yeah,
And so now that we have child fine, which forces schools, public schools, have a duty to find children with disabilities and intellectual disabilities
Yep.
in their districts and educate them. And I thought that was like, oh, that makes perfect sense. Like all the little pieces, I thought a lot of it came from the Park case and what that case said, but there were also these other pieces from the history of like, what was actually historically going on in these cities and even rural places where it's like, why aren't kids with disabilities being educated? And that's one of them. Like one of
Yeah. And I think in a way, I see that the child find part of idea as this great answer to uh, the way in which I think a lot of lawmakers that were working on EHA in 1975 were actually kind of embarrassed by how few statistics we
yeah,
actually kept at that time about how many kids are handicapped, right? So they have this sort of idea growing in the late 60s and early 70s to pass some kind of support and federal oversight
yeah,
of the education of students with disabilities. And people were asking questions like, how many kids in this
yeah,
country actually have these disabilities? And everyone was just like,
yeah,
uh, like no one had even, it's embarrassing really how
yeah,
little statistical record
yeah.
there was
That
of
was
the need.
purposeful. I
Yeah,
mean, it was like a shunning of people. And that kind of gives me to my next question, which
yeah,
is basically, I read like in 1967, the estimate is around 200,000 people with disabilities were living in institutions. What did it, I mean, and this was pretty much the impetus too, to, whoa, like, look what is happening in these places, like there was some reporting being done and other
yeah,
things. And it's like no one had any idea, or they did, and they closed their eyes, closed their ears, and tried to
yeah,
forget that those places existed. What was it like to live in an institution like that, if you were a child, especially? And
yeah.
yeah, and then how, why would we, when we started shutting those places down, I think that was why what are we going to do with these kids? We got to put them in school. Where else are we going to put them? If they're not meant to be here, where are they meant to be?
Right. Like, yeah, that's a really good point about how the deinstitutionalization movement is also kind of dovetails with the movement to educate students with disabilities in public schools. And it's amazing to me how you said that 200,000 people with disabilities were living in institutions in 1967. I found that like by 1966, 127,000 school-age
Oh
children
my
were
God.
enrolled in institutions, and that was an increase of 40,000 since 1958. So I think there's a way in which um, it's part of the culture of the
Yes.
United States especially in the 50s and the 60s to again just make people with disabilities invisible.
Yes.
And that's the role that these institutions served.
Yeah.
Um,
It was
I
like after
have
the war, they just got everybody had to look like Leave It to Beaver or something. We all had to like have this perfect little family.
Yeah, yeah, and white picket fences and well-behaved, neatly dressed, smart children at all times with very good manners. And yeah, um,
That sounds horrible. Like,
it
I don't know
sounds,
why anybody would want to do this.
yeah, it sounds horrible. I mean, and I just uh, I can't imagine facing so much pressure to make your child invisible.
Yeah.
It's just really unspeakable to me. But like you mentioned, there's more interest in the late 60s and 70s to make these conditions visible and to make the public reckon basically with what they've done to people with disabilities. So you have like the reports on Willowbrook in New York um, that are certainly something that brought a lot of attention to the just completely dehumanized conditions of institutions. There's a photo essay that's published called Christmas in Purgatory in the 60s. That's also, it's a photo essay and it's showing the conditions at a particular institution as well, with children that also really got a lot of attention.
Yeah.
So yes, like that is that's these two movements are really kind of dovetailing in the 70s for
Yeah. It was
sure.
like time, like you said, it's culture. It was our culture and it was what was happening. And then it was finally time, it bubbled up to like, we need a law. We need the law to take over and to quell what's going on culturally because we've finally hit. It was basically, Board of Brown versus Board of
Yeah,
Education,
right, right.
showed us same thing. This is what we should be doing. This should be the law.
Yeah.
Um, very, very good court case that was very clear. And then there were these parents of children with disabilities who were like, "Hey, wait a minute. If we're going to desegregate these schools for Black children, we should definitely be doing this for our kids too." And
Yeah.
that is part of the civil rights that came, 1965, and then we got to 71 with the Park case, and then 34 cases later, we got what would become the IDEA. But before the IDEA, you were saying some kids were educated. It depended on kind of your privilege and where you lived.
Yep.
How did schools determine who they were going to accept before then? Like, I was reading about some teachers, like, and I hate even saying it, but like they would say, like, this child is educable or this child is trainable. Talk a little bit more about what those kind of words mean and what that like it is kind of part of that shameful, like I can't imagine my Evie. I'm like, is she educable? Is she trainable? Like, oh,
Yeah, I mean, those words from what I've read are part of a kind of like a lexicon of words surrounding intellectual disability, right? So educable is usually used to refer to somebody who at that time was referred to as being mildly retarded, right? So, and this is a kind of hierarchy based on IQ testing as
yeah,
well. So this would be somebody who has like a, I don't know, around a 70 or something of an IQ, and then moderately retarded was a trainable person, right? Like again, these are the words of the time.
yeah,
Um and so there's this distinction, um, this really specious distinction that's being made between like people who can handle analysis and some kind of intellectual thought and those that are best for labor.
yes,
Like
right.
that's kind of what that educable versus trainable um, is. And it's a kind of like a parsing of disability based on an intelligence test, which is a really flawed and discriminatory and problematic way of determining this. I mean, so there were state schools for the deaf and the blind, like that were around since the 1850s, but these weren't compulsory. And like I said before, they weren't compulsory and they were kind of separated from mainstream schools. Um, but it would have been, I think I have never heard of a case or a somebody telling me about a personal experience they have of somebody with an intellectual disability um, being supported and doing well in a classroom with their peers
Yeah,
before 1975 or so. It just didn't. It wasn't even ever attempted.
yeah, right. It wasn't. Yeah, I mean, I was telling you before we started, I was reading this book I got about this school teacher named Elizabeth Farrell, who was like one of the first school teachers who taught children with special education in like the early 1900s. And it was saying that basically she was seeing that they were just basically training children to do work. And if they weren't working in the little schoolhouse kind of setting that they were in and learning how to do like work they would be doing, they would just be sitting there, like twiddling their thumbs.
Hmm.
And she was like, um, what it kind of reminds me, like, nothing's changed. Like, things are changing, things have progressed. But we still have, I at least, and I think a lot of parents like me still have this fight of like, I still want my child to be educated like every other child and included.
Yeah.
And we have this time when they're like 13, 14, where we start talking about transition and education and like transition skills out in the community. And we just want to like for a lot of our kids, our schools just want to be like, all right, time to do some life skills and time to do some work related skills, which yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I still want to work on the same things that all the other kids are working on. And I do feel like
Yeah.
this push-pull still, and it's economic, it's kind of based in our capitalistic mindset of how we do everything here in this country, but I don't know, I struggle with it.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, and like you're saying, I want both.
Yes,
And I recognize also that like schools are more and more like job oriented,
yes,
right?
yes. Our
Schools, I mean,
education department in Ohio is now called the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce.
yeah, right. As and we live in a overly efficient, obsessed, and pragmatic and
Yes,
cynical kind of society. But like yes, I want my daughter to have a job, but I also see another kind of value in education.
yeah,
That is, there you actually become a good citizen and a complex human who can make make good decisions about themselves, about their communities based on education. And that seems to, I think, legislators, frivolous and impractical and difficult to write out as assessment goals and
yeah. Mhm.
a clear sense of success at the end. But we have to, I think, even with AI coming about, we're going to be thinking a lot more about what it means to educate a human being.
Yes, you're exactly right. Oh
And
my God.
this is
Yeah,
this is part of it. Like, what is the difference between a human being and what education does for them and a data processing
yeah.
computer?
Yeah, I actually have in both my kids' future planning statements in their IEPs that I want them to enjoy learning, um, something about enjoying learning and being an active member and like how they learn kind of thing, because I really
Yeah,
want that piece. Like it's not just about like I
it
want
makes
them
for
to
a
actually,
happy life,
yeah,
doesn't
it
it?
really does. It does. I mean, the curiosity and learning and like it's the only thing I think like as you get older, like you can always be learning new things. It's so great.
Yeah,
I prioritize that, but I know we don't always in the education system. Let me ask you, some states
yeah.
always had these laws mandating an education of children or did or earlier than others, like Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, New York, while other states had laws against educating children with
Hmm.
disabilities. So it seems we have major differences, had major differences amongst the states on this issue. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that and how that impacted children with disabilities. And given the fact that we might be going back to a disunified education system in this country where we don't
Yeah,
have a federal system and we're just going to just leave it up to the states.
yeah.
What do you think
Yeah,
that's
I
going
mean,
to do?
exactly. My thoughts are is that this is what happens when you return education to the states, right? Like I've always been really fascinated about how that why that phrase return to the states is such a compelling phrase for some politicians.
Yeah.
Like return to when?
Yes.
To like when is exactly the golden age that you're talking about here um of education returned to the states, and also the states still control plenty
Yeah.
about education. So I've always been confused and fascinated about that, but like, um you know I think I don't think I mean I'm saying this now, who knows what'll happen in a year, but
Yeah.
I do not think that idea will ever be repealed. I think it'll be weakened to where states just can get by with ignoring the
Yeah.
law. Um, and given the overall kind of financial crises of school districts, and the strain that their budget is under because the federal government does not fund IDEA, but school districts still have to abide by that law. Um, I think it's going to become pretty dire, and we're going to see a lot of kind of workarounds and very sneaky, sophisticated cuts
Yeah.
to what school districts are providing for students with disabilities, even though these federal laws about IDEA and say also, the 14th Amendment,
Yeah. Right.
where I don't think we're talking about that going away yet, the
Yeah.
14th Amendment. But again, who knows? That says we have this equal opportunity
Yeah.
clause, and you can't make opportunities like education available for some students
Right.
and not others. So yeah, like we, in a way, the past tells us what the future can hold, right?
Yeah.
As we see this backsliding of federal oversight and a real kind of disinterest in enforcing IDEA, um, we can see from history what actually this could look like.
Yeah. Yeah. When we talk about the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, who was for it and who was against it? Like your article was really informative on this. I thought the part about Gerald Ford was really interesting. Can you talk about who is for it, who is against it, and like kind of the politics around it?
Yeah, there's a real good book by a man named Edward Martin called Breakthrough, which he was kind of the central White House staffer and lawmaker who really stewarded through the Education for All Handicapped Children Act. Um, and eventually becomes a real leader in the government for issues of people with special education. And I think, he says that it's parents that really brought this issue to the foreground. It was parent advocates that were making this big push, and I also get the sense that most, as all laws do, that I have to remind myself of because I'm so darn impatient. Like rules and laws take a lot of time,
Yeah.
and so it starts basically in the Johnson administration, and then kind of keeps going during the Nixon administration, and then rides the wave of distraction during Watergate. And I really get the sense that it's not as if there was a lot of outright opposition to it, because I think people know that if you explicitly oppose a law for kids with disabilities, you just look like a jerk.
Yeah.
Um, but it was a matter of making people pay attention, right? Like just making, and maybe, Jen, you feel this today in your own advocacy that like nobody is gonna explicitly
Mm.
oppose a law for kids with disabilities because that's bad PR, but it's a matter of making them care, like doing something
Yeah.
is the harder part of it, it seems to me. And like even Gerald Ford signs it, but he is kind of like um he signs it because he doesn't want to be known as the president that vetoes the bill for kids with disabilities. He doesn't have any kind of celebratory ceremony for the signing of the bill. And really, in a note that he wrote accompanying the signed bill, he kind of says that he thinks this is falsely raising the expectations of the groups affected. And I think what he meant by that is that he thought the funding levels were too high, right? So it sets the funding levels that the federal government would contribute 40% to the funding of IDEA. And I think he thought that was unrealistic. And, maybe he was actually kind of right about
He
that
probably
because
was.
we've
Yeah.
never got there. But I also wonder if did he mean something else by that too? Like, did he think funding stu or educating students with disabilities was unrealistic? Like,
Yeah.
did he see a kind of prejudice that I think Jen and I are aware of here, but
Mhm.
maybe even more so? Like, he never elaborates on it, but
Yeah.
I just wonder if it seemed so far-fetched to him that the government could guarantee students
Yeah.
with disabilities and
I
education.
think it's just that piece of your article to me was like, oh, it was so uh like a shot to the stomach almost because it's that law is so groundbreaking.
Yeah, I
And
know.
everything we know since, like all the research we know since,
It is
high
amazing.
expectations for students
Yep.
with disabilities are going to be better for them. They're going to be, their education is, in all ways, the data shows if you have high expectations, if you strengthen the role of parents, which is what the IDEA does, if you coordinate
Yep.
with other service providers, which is what it makes you do, bringing
Yep.
the whole team together, better results. If you do accommodations in general education, better results for all kids.
Yeah.
Intensive training for special education teachers and paraprofessionals, which it makes you do
Yep.
better for everyone, better results.
Yeah.
Like every piece of the law, I just think, I don't know, I just wish that a president at the time could have really seen it and been like, look what I am signing. Like, look at this master. It
Yeah.
really is a masterpiece, which you're right, it won't ever be, I don't think it'll ever be repealed because it is really well done. And thank
Yeah.
you, Ed Martin, for all the work
Seriously.
he did
I
and so
know.
many parents. And
Yeah.
they really found, like when I was reading about even Elizabeth Farrell, like they shunned people, they mistreated people and they didn't care about people. And like the all three of those things are like what this the promise of the IDEA is,
I know.
And so it fixes all of the things, It
Yeah, I mean
goes,
it certainly has its flaws, but it
yes.
is it is actually pretty brilliant and right, like I think we see Ed Martin's patience
Yeah,
in
yeah,
listening to people and listening to all sides of the stakeholders here and really kind of
yeah.
bringing everyone together. I mean, not to give President Ford a pass, but like it was a busy time,
Yeah,
you
right. There were a
know.
couple things going on at the time.
Right. He had just pardoned Nixon and there was a lot going on, but still I'm with you. Like uh there was and it's funny to me like I remember the ceremony for the ADA, um
Yeah,
the celebration about when that law was passed. Even I was a kid and I
yeah.
even kind of was I remember being aware of it.
Hmm.
Um
Yeah,
but like this one is idea is just as if not more so important
yeah.
and um yeah didn't it was just kind of like wah wah.
Like, sucks. There were a lot of things going on, but I do think you're right. Like it takes a long time. I do think we had Kennedy who really put it out there. Like this is
Yeah,
what he wanted, and his family, of course, did so
right.
much for people with disabilities. And like I think if he would have been president longer, which we probably would have gotten this sooner,
Yeah,
to be honest.
yeah, yeah,
Okay, so like basically I want to let you go because I know you're so busy, but I want to just kind of pull everything together and talk about, we've already kind of touched on it a little bit, but I think the culture, like the more I read about this, like you're right, like the culture of the 50s, 60s, 70s played this major role in like who got educated, who we thought was worth it or not,
yep,
kind of thing. And then when the IDEA was passed, it was very clear that the law now informed who was getting access to education. So now here we are, 2025. I feel like the culture is pretty heavy right now. Like there is a lot being said about who is valuable in our country and who is
yep,
not. Who does, and I think the education piece of this is there. I mean, I think it's even being said right now that immigrants shouldn't be educated in our public education system. Stuff like that is being said.
Yeah.
And that is that whole mindset, that whole like Darwinian
Yeah.
mindset, that whole like patriarchal mindset that we really want to bring back. What are your thoughts? How important is it to fight against the disunification of education across
Yeah.
the states? And how do we create a more like equitable education system in this country, despite the fact that we're trying to do this like classist,
Yeah.
hierarchical? I'm worried.
Yep.
Like your IQ book is very, I mean, this is
I
all
know.
very timely. So thank you for the
Yeah.
work you're doing. It's important right now. So tell
Yeah, I mean,
close us off. Tell us what we can do and how
I think
save us, Pepper.
right. Jesus. Okay, so I think about this as like we have two very different ideas of what public school is in this country right now. There's an idea that's on the ascension that public education is education funded by the public, right? And that does it means in whatever way that it can be
Yeah.
private schools through school vouchers, it can be charter schools, it can be private education accounts, like this idea that all of that is public school if it is funded by public tax dollars. Um, and that's all kind of under this name of school choice, right? This term school choice. Um, and it to me, this is a kind of model that values a kind of individualism above all else, right? It's school that's about kind of like you said, this Darwinian, my kid's gonna get what he
Yeah.
deserves more, and that's what matters. Like
Yeah.
education is about this individual fight
Yeah.
for access. Um, Except, of course, it's the white affluent families without disabilities that benefit the most from that kind of individualized
Yes.
system of thought of school. And, of course, students with disabilities aren't going to be able to access that ideology of education very well. Private schools don't accept students with disabilities very often. They don't have to use IEPs. There's really not a lot of regulation now about if private schools are taking
Yeah.
public school funding, do they have to have IEPs? That's not really established. Um, so that's the kind of hyper individualized, I'm going to get mine survival of the fittest model of what education is. There's also a model that says a kind of more progressivist model that sees public education in all of its flaws and failures as a model of democratic life, right? A place in which we learn from each other and learn to live together, that we all have a responsibility towards each other. Um, and that we teach students what it means to be a citizen and what it means to be part of a community, right? Like that is a value of education as well. And I think children with disabilities should play a vital role in that community. Um, but the federal government also has to do its part in funding that community through IDEA, right? It has to buy in to that idea of schools as a place in which we teach students to live and learn and be citizens together. So I certainly don't have like a policy suggestion, but I do think that it's a matter of um, people need to figure out their ideologies and be honest with themselves about what they think education is. Is it about individualism to make sure your kid gets ahead at the expense of everybody else?
Yeah.
Or is it about teaching your kid to learn with others and be part of a community in a more, I guess, civic minded way?
Yeah. Yeah. I think you just covered it. I don't think I've ever thought about it as an individualized education system. And I think you're right. And it's sad. And
Yeah, it's really sad.
I think that's where a lot of our like community kind of issues come from because we've lost community.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
really have. And like the only thing kind of holding it together are these public schools. When I think about community and how important things are, I think about it when we're trying to pass a school levy or we're trying to pass, like our board of DD levies or our fire and, public levy kind of things and what we're doing to like our property taxes in this state of Ohio. I'm like, I
Exactly.
just think it's so sad because those are the only times where I think people really do sit back and say, you know what? I'm really proud of like the school that we have here. Like
Right.
I see, the kids getting on the bus and the families going to work.
Yep.
And I see that the road is paved and the and when there's a fire, the fire station, like
Yeah.
we never see it because we take it all for granted. You see it come out of your paycheck, and maybe you're seeing more of it come out of your paycheck because
Right.
a lot of stuff coming out.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
tough
Yeah.
times and I get that. And so I'm wondering if like it's just another such a huge discussion here. It's so complex because it's like the middle class is just being squeezed on all ends. And I worry that we're missing it makes when you're feeling squeezed, you do get a little bit more like individualized. Like, I'm going to
Self-centered.
save myself
Yeah,
and my
yeah.
family and
Yep.
not everybody else.
Yeah.
And that's sad because you really should really look around and say, this is so important. We're going to live, people with disabilities are going to live in your community forever. Like
Yep.
they're going to live and work in your community. And so they should be in your kids' schools.
Right.
Um, and they should be, getting the best education possible because it's just going to cost a whole lot less later on,
Right.
you know?
Right.
Thank you, Pepper.
Yeah. Thank you, Jen.
This has been a
My
great
pleasure.
conversation. And
As
you're just going to
always with
be a
you.
regular guest all the time on the
Yes,
podcast,
please.
I guess.
I would love that.
I appreciate your time and thank you for joining the ARC podcast.
Yes, anytime, Jen. Thank you.
All right, see ya.